it's a tough industry for mental health. It's one of those industries where, you're not flogging yourself, but sacrifice is kind of rewarded. Well, if you're on a big production, a big series, and you come in on a Monday and people are like, oh yeah, like I was preparing for this shoot and I came into the office on Saturday, Sunday. There's like a pride in that. And it's hard to not like do that yourself.
Today's show is Chris Barron. He's a documentary filmmaker who has produced and directed for the BBC, Nat Geo, some other networks. And Chris is going to come on today and tell us everything about being a documentary filmmaker and what it's like to live and work within that career. And now, without any further delay, here's Chris Barron. Hey, Chris Barron, how you doing? Welcome to Tales from the Shift.
Hey Shane, thanks so much for having the show. How you doing?
Doing great. It's a little early in the morning. I'm waking up, but I'm glad to have you on. Never had a documentary filmmaker, and I think it's going to be a real banger. So
Yeah,
let's start out with the real basics. Tell us, what do you do? What does a documentary filmmaker do?
Well, yeah, a documentary filmmaker. I mean, first off, it's the best job in the world, as far as I'm concerned. It's amazing. And it's such a privilege to do this kind of job, because the kind of job that when I was growing up, I was like, it's not a job people can do. You just lucky people get to do that. But fundamentally, we're storytellers, we're no different from authors or movie storytellers, but what the stories that we tell are out in the real world, So our job is to go out and find stories that are out there with real people and real events and bring them and basically produce them in such a way that they're entertaining. We use great camera tricks and fun editing styles and narrative techniques and to bring audiences these real stories in an entertaining way.
Awesome. I have a joke for you. What do you call a documentary that actually comes in under budget and on schedule?
God, tell me.
The answer is fiction.
Fiction, yeah. Well, you try and tell a Hollywood filmmaker, like a fiction filmmaker, to get something in on time and on schedule, they would just laugh as well. Anything to do with production is just one of those like time and money sinks that this is one of the things about people don't realize, I think, is that when you get into production of any kind, it just takes way longer and it's way more expensive than you ever imagined.
Have you ever worked with a producer or director that for some reason always just nails it? Like they just know that if they say the budget is X, they're going to be there and it's going to be just like that.
I've worked on all sorts. I've worked on low budget stuff. I've worked on big budget stuff. And often it's the low budget stuff. When you have a shoestring budget and they're like, I think I worked on a documentary that was probably like for the BBC 4. So BBC has like multiple channels, BBC 1 and 2 are the big ones. BBC 4 is like their like documentary niche kind of thing. But their budgets are tiny. And I was a producer on this small little documentary, little 90-minute doc. And it was like £70,000 was the budget for this 90-minute feature-length documentary. And that's like 100,000 US or something like that, which is pretty small compared to a lot of budgets. And, the production scale was over like a year and all that kind of stuff. But when you have tiny budgets, they're like, well, this is your budget. If you go a penny over, then you're toast. There is no more money to scrape along. But the big budget, it's almost like the bigger the budget, the more fat there is to be like, well, maybe not necessarily. It's more like the bigger the budget, the bigger the stakes. It's kind of that thing if like maybe you spent $1 million on a house, you're like, well, what's another 200 grand to get the sort of like, the renovations done, that kind of thing. But like, so yeah. So it can be done, but it's tough.
I remember, so Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was making a movie, T3, I think it might have been, the Terminator 3. And he ended up using his own money to make a scene that the studio didn't want him to do. It ended up being successful or whatever. Have you ever thought, if I could just throw in a little dollar here, this is going to be way better documentary? Does that ever happen?
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think that might be the difference between independent filmmaking and, like, I guess you'd call it commercial filmmaking or broadcast filming, which is where I come from, working for channels like BBC, Nat Geo, Smithsonian, all that kind of stuff. If you're making an independent documentary and you've kind of got, maybe $500,000 of funding and, then you're like, oh, but there's this one shoot that I've just found this story at the end of the day and it'd be so cool. And then you basically go, it's going to cost me like 50 grand. Then you can go like, well, that's going to be great because it's part of, I'm adding my money into the big pot of funders. And and you have control of it. But when it comes to like the network and the broadcast stuff, we always think about it. Don't get me wrong. You always think about it, but you're like, this is such a big machine, and me throwing my money in there probably is, even though you'd like to do it, it's not worth the money.
The ROI might not be there, and then they might go, well, we're just cutting that anyway because we already have 1 hour. And okay,
yeah, and you basically, you'd be doing it for your own ego's sake, put it that way. Whereas an independent documentary, you may get a financial return for like an ending that was way better, but you had to spend an extra chunk of money on it.
Yeah. How did you even get started in this career?
I mean, that's a long story. I mean, I started, fundamentally, I'd had no idea what I wanted to do when I was growing up. I knew that I liked science. I kind of had a great science teacher at school, and in particular biology. And so I just followed that track for a while. I really loved high school biology, and then ended up doing
Where was that at?
I've got a bit of an interesting expat career. I was born in Australia, but then I grew up in the United States, in Houston, Texas, and I did my, I guess you call it elementary school, all that kind of stuff in the States. Then I went to Dubai and started my high school there. And then I got halfway through high school, and then I went to Scotland to finish my high school. So I kind of like had this weird education background all over the place.
I was going to say your accent, if someone said, tell me where he's from, I would be going,
yeah,
sure. I'm not sure.
I was having this conversation with my family earlier today just about my accent, and they're like, it's kind of lightly Scottish, but British. And then my wife's friend, we went to a wedding with the other week, he was like, you basically have an international school accent. You know, it's somewhere like European, maybe a twang of American. Like my colleagues laugh at me sometimes. So if I'm doing like calls, for example, like making a documentary, and a lot of the characters, a lot of the teams are in the US, I'll be on the phone or on these Zoom calls and stuff, and they'll suddenly hear my accent like shift slightly to American, and it's completely subconscious, but it's certainly like it's built in there somewhere. And then I'll get off the call, and they'll be, in the UK or whatever. They're like, why did you start speaking with an American accent all of a sudden?
Are you playing games with us?
Yeah, they're like, yeah. But like all my like home videos when I was a kid, like 6 years old, like running around in like cowboy boots with literally an American Texan twang. So it's funny. So yeah, I had this, bizarre background. Yeah.
I can't even imagine how the other kids must have been, maybe not teasing, but wanting to even hear you talk, because I was born in Texas. I was born in San Antonio.
Oh,
I moved to Chicago when I was that age. And so even in Chicago, they're going, hey, say pen. And I'm going, pin, and they're just like, whoa, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. So I would imagine something like that happened.
Yeah, it happened. I mean, going to somewhere like Dubai from Texas, Dubai was a really expat-y kind of place. There's people from all over. So it's quite like you got people from India, South Africa, Australia, France. Like you're all kind of just mixed into this big melting pot of weird. And that's probably what's happened to my accent. It kind of became this weird melting pot as well. And it's probably when I got to Scotland that it was a bit more like, because a lot of Scottish people there, and I didn't sound Scottish. But I think that's where it really started to like, because I spent time in Glasgow, and for any listeners that know Glasgow has a very thick Scottish accent to the point where you might not be able to understand what they're saying. So a lot of my friends are Glaswegian, and then that took my accent probably slightly stronger towards the Scottish side. But so yeah. So yeah, where were we? Oh yeah, background.
Your background. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was want to interrupt.
No, it's cool. Well, I did. So I love science, and when I got to picking my university choices, I chose a bunch, and I chose sports science, a few options, and I mean I don't know how it works in the States, but when you're in the UK and you're choosing universities in the UK, you basically have 6 university and courses you can pick from. And you send out all those 6 applications, and whatever comes back, you can choose, So of those 6, 4 of them were sports science. And then I had 2 wild cards. One was forensic biology, so like criminology and DNA stuff. And then I had photography as the other wild card. And between when I applied for all that stuff and when I got all the acceptance forms and stuff, I'd met a lot of people doing sports science. And I was like, I don't want to be a physio. I don't want to be a coach. That's not really for me. And so I was kind of left with my wild cards. I was like, do forensic biology or photography. And I ended up doing the forensic course and loved the science part of it. But throughout the whole thing, like, again, it was missing something for me. It was fun doing all the criminology, like the blood splatter stuff and DNA analysis. But I think at some point I realized that job would basically be sitting in a lab and you'd get like a shirt with a blood spot from it, from like a stab wound or whatever, or something else. And you'd cut it out with a pair of scissors, stick it in a robot. The robot would do its analysis and would print out some whatever. And then you basically stand up in court, read the results, and then go back to the lab and do it all again the next day. And I just thought there's something missing. There's not enough like creativity or exploration involved. And so I did a master's degree in molecular microbiology, and that had that like level of like, okay, great, we've got this problem to solve. You know, we're doing a new experiment. We're trying to figure out something. You need to problem solve. You need to work out, you know, how to figure out this problem. And it was super fun. And so great, this is kind of more in the direction. And I was like, great, okay, PhD is the next step. And I applied for a few PhDs. And then I started meeting people in PhDs, and I was like, they all seem really miserable for some reason. Like, it's pretty, like, it's tough work, the PhD, and it's so niche on a particular corner. Like, you spend 4 years of your life researching this tiny little corner of like science that no one may or may not give a crap about. And so I was like, I don't want to do that. And then I scrapped the PhD idea, and I was like, I need a job. And so I essentially got a job in something called scientific sales. And it's basically selling consumables to labs, like reagents and equipment, like DNA sequencers, or like, you know, all that kind of stuff to university labs. I was like, great, now I'm earning money, you know, at least. And the great thing about that job was that it got me in front of a lot of different professors. And I was like, oh, cool, maybe I'll have a chance to meet a professor that I'd really enjoyed their subject, and I'll do a PhD with them. But what transpired was I did 9 months of this job in scientific sales and realized I did not give a crap about sales targets and all these kinds of like, you know, meeting your KPIs, and, you know, and everyone else was so obsessed with money. And I was like, you know, your job is to sort of just squeeze as much money out of, and sometimes it was charities, you know, Cancer Research UK and all this kind of stuff. And I just felt like this wasn't quite a right fit for me. And that's when I had a real like crisis moment. And the crisis moment happened when it was at these like, you probably know these like big like quarterly sales meetings where like all of the regional people like descend on the Hilton in like Manchester or something like that. You got like 1,000 people, all the different teams from the UK, from the Netherlands, from wherever, and they sit in a room and they congratulate each other, and they could put big spreadsheets on the wall and go, look how much money we've made. You guys are great. You get a prize. You sold the most stuff. Here's a bottle of champagne. And I remember just sitting in that thing and being like, this is not me. And at 10 o'clock that night, I remember going back to my hotel room, sitting on my bed and having like a sort of like, like an identity crisis moment. Like, this is like, what am I going to do for the next 45 years of my life? Because I can't do this. And I sat there and I was like, okay, great. It's going to be, what do you love doing? And I broke down my things that I was interested in, things that I knew that I could be interested in for the rest of my career. And I knew I still love science. That passion for science was still there. And the other thing that was always sort of in the background was photography. And so I literally sat in my bed that night and I Googled, you know, what jobs can you do that are science and photography based. And one of the results, like literally an advert came up, I think, for the BBC in Glasgow. They had a science department and they were looking for an intern, you know, unpaid 4-week internship. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll give that. That sounds kind of fun. Again, that idea of being a filmmaker was never even registered on my radar. But I thought, you know, it doesn't hurt to try. And I literally threw in an application that night. And like a week later, they emailed me back saying, hey, do you want to come in? We love your CV. Do you want to come be an intern? And I had a problem because this was like September and like middle of September or whatever. And they were like, can you start the 1st of October? And I was like, oh, that's in like 2 weeks time. And usually a lot of these applicants might be, you know, graduates or whatever, you know, just looking for work and available to start whenever, but I had a job. And so I went to my boss and said, is there any chance to get like 4 weeks unpaid leave? He's like, what for? And I was like, well, there's this internship thing came up. And he's like, what's the internship? It's like, it's at the BBC. He's like, well, that has nothing to do with sales. So you're clearly not that interested in sales. But, you know, he's like, so if you just ignore this BBC thing, it's your first year, you're on probation or whatever. If you stay to the end of the year, you got pretty good sales target, you're above your target. If you stay to the end of the year, you're going to basically get a bonus check for like £33,000, which is, I don't know, like 37,000 US dollars or something on top of my annual salary. And I was like, and I was like 23-year-old guy. Like, I was like, that's not bad. Like, and so I took the weekend to think about it. And then I just realized that that would be it. That would be the rest of my life, would be dangling checks in front of me
Yeah.
like the whole time. And I was like, it was, at the end of the day, it was an easy choice. And so I was like, quit my job, gave my notice and went to the BBC thing. And it was best decision ever made.
Wow. That'll be tough. That is tough to say, okay, just keep your 35 grand. I would imagine my daughter was in a situation with one of her jobs where they had given her a bonus. And the fact they know you're leaving after that,
Hmm.
they might have found a way to claw that back, oh, well, you're breaching contract for this or that. So
Yeah.
I'm not even sure you'd have kept the whole thing if you had stuck around and still left.
Yeah, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. They always sting you with the contract fine print. And as a 23-year-old guy, like, how well do you really understand those contracts? You got to
Yep. Yep.
all the
Yep.
lawyer
Yep.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to assume the answer to this is probably not great, but what would you say the work-life balance is when you're doing documentary film work?
Probably much the same as an air traffic controller, but I've never been an air traffic controller. So, um, I mean, it's not one for stability. I mean, when you're in production, you're working all hours. You got to get the job done, come hell or high water, particularly if you're on shoots. So, you kind of got like different phases of a production. Let's say you've got like a research phase and a pre-shoot planning phase, and you've got your shoots and then you got your post-production, all that kind of stuff. And like the work-life balance changes depending which part of the shoot you're in. The most
How often
intense.
how often would you say you're in the I'm local at home work-life balance versus I have to go somewhere work? Like how often are you?
I mean, it depends on the shoot, but in terms of time, maybe I'm gonna guess like 20 to 30% of the time you might be on shoot kind of thing.
Okay.
And the calmest bit is probably in the pre-production kind of set because you're researching, you're doing phone calls, it's all pretty normal. And as soon as you start creeping towards that shoot, like, okay, that's when you're like, okay, I'm going to stay a few extra hours. I'm going to work the weekend because there's all those like loose ends that you've got to tie up before shoot. Because when you hit the ground in the shoot, that is when the money ticker really starts going. You've got rental equipment, you've got crews that you're paying for, you've got travel and accommodation and food, like all the extra the stuff that comes from production. So you cannot have to basically have all your contingencies in order before you go and shoot because that has to go as smoothly as possible. And then when you get to post production, it's kind of the same in a way. Like the first few weeks of post production can be nice. Just getting your scripts in order, your transcripts, and your scripting, and your editors are sorting through the material. And then as you start creeping towards that first like cut deadline, the rough cut, then you're like, okay, great. Now we're working like late evenings and you're working weekends again and just trying to get everything done. But it's the sort of career that, I myself have sacrificed friends' birthdays and important life events of friends and family. It's been tough, at some points.
Do you have a spouse or are you able to keep a partner?
Yeah. 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 So I have a wife and she's, very understanding, and, you know, uh, to give you an example, like I think it was one of my first birthdays we were together. I can't remember which one it is, but we had this, she had this we're both big Star Wars fans. And, I think one of the Star Wars films had come out and there was this beautiful island in Ireland that one of the films was shot at, and she had planned to take me to Ireland for like a long weekend and planned it all out. And the island only has like a limited number of people per day that can visit. It's like 30 people because it's like UNESCO heritage and stuff. And so it wasn't a surprise. She told me about it, and it was during a shoot, during a production, and it was kind of creeping towards that stage of like we had recce's going on before the shoot, and she never let me forget this. But like basically, what happened was the recce had been moved up by a couple of weeks and landed. I was supposed to be in Egypt for this recce, and it landed exactly when she had planned this like trip for my birthday to this island. And I was like, I remember texting her saying like, this is happening. And you could tell she was really disappointed. And after all the stuff we'd done, trying to get refunds and all that sort of stuff. And then what made it worse was a couple of weeks later, the recce moved again. And so we could have gone on the trip. So like that was actually even more painful than the first time.
I don't know what a recce is. Can you tell me what?
Apologies. I guess in American parlance, there'd probably be a scout trip. So a
Okay.
reconnaissance trip, a scouting trip.
Oh, so you're taking the word
Yeah,
reconnaissance. Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool.
yeah.
Like
So
brekkie.
yeah, so
Like we're having breakfast. No, we're
like
having brekkie.
brekkie. Yeah. So
Okay.
sorry, that must be a British television term, but yeah. So it's a scouting trip. So basically, if we've got a big shoot, for example, with like lots of logistics and lots of stories and lots of contributors we need to find, often it's best for the producer, i.e., me, to go to these places in advance to lock everything down, see it with my own eyes, run through particular things, see any potential problems, so then I can come back and we can really iron out all the potential issues before we go and shoot. But yeah, so it was painful to have that done, but it just sort of really highlights the nature of how unpredictable this industry is and what you have to sacrifice to get the job done.
Yeah. So we know the path that you took to get into this career field. If someone wanted to become a documentary filmmaker, what would be the easiest way to get going on that path? What do you think if you were
That
starting
is
over, you're I don't know, 20 years old, what would you do? What would be the best way to do it?
the thing that I love about television and documentaries is that everybody has such an interesting origin story. Everyone comes at it from a different angle. I mean, I'd say there's probably two main, when it comes to documentary filmmaking is huge. You've got everything from, National Geographic, 1 hour documentaries and your BBC documentaries and stuff, to your indie-led feature documentaries and your embedded journalistic kind of documentaries in like Ukraine are massively different genres and skill sets. So for me, I mean, if it was doing my route again and I was 20 and just come out of university, I don't think I would change too much because the sort of style that documentaries I make is what's called factual or specialist factual documentaries. So that's usually like history or science or nature documentaries. And people that go into those usually have a specialism, whether you've done like a wildlife degree or a zoology degree and you go off to make those David Attenborough documentaries, or you've got a science degree like me, you go and make science documentaries. So, usually that in that case, you would start at the bottom. You would either, contact a company. I would say, if you really want to get into it, you watch a lot of documentaries, find out some that you like, and watch the end of the credits, because the end of the credits show you who made it, and it'll usually have a production company. And you go, I love that documentary. That is exactly the kind of thing that I want to do, whether it's history or archaeology or science or whatever, it doesn't matter. Then you Google them and you go, great, there's a company that made that show, and then just email them, and then say, look, I'm just I've come out of college and I've got this degree. I'm super passionate about it. And a lot of times they're looking for people that are exactly the kind of people that love making their docs. And you'll start right at the bottom. You'll be getting teas and coffees for everybody. But I think it's one of the most important things to do is to start at the bottom. In saying the other side of documentary filmmaking, the indie side of it, it's very different. That's the sort of thing where it's a lot more like run and gun, trying to do like as much as you can with as little budget. And, I think the advice that I always give in that sense is that you don't, and a lot of people I know that have done this, don't worry about making something with a big budget or having crazy camera kit or whatever. You have an iPhone. You basically have an amazing tool in your pocket now to make a documentary. The thing that people care about most is story. Don't worry about how it looks or how it sounds or whatever. Capture the story. And if you have a story that no one else has seen or no one else has heard of, or it's done in a particularly interesting way, it doesn't matter. You do that when you're 20 years old. You can get so much free. You just take your iPhone or a cheap camera. You can get good editing tools for free these days. Just go and make it. You'll make a lot of mistakes and it won't be perfect, but make it. And you've got a calling card. You can put it on YouTube, send it around, being like, hey, I'm looking for some funding or some money. This is what I can do. And people will go, wow, that's cool. You've done something a bit different. You've got a great story, a good eye for capturing a story. That's your first step on the ladder usually.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm trying to picture the career path of somebody. So you've made it to the point where you do producing and or directing, maybe at the same time. We'll talk about that more later. But if someone is starting out, what might they end up doing prior to making it to that? If they went and tried to work at a company, and then what might happen after that? I'm curious, like where you might go to when you decide you don't want to travel all over the world.
I mean, right at the beginning, I mean, I guess you're saying what are you doing as an entry level in the television stage,
Yeah, like
right?
what's the career arc look like in this world?
Oh man, that's again, it's so broad. It's almost impossible to really track it.
Okay.
People have started um people started like DJing. I know a cameraman who started as a DJ. Actually, no, he started before that, making something in a factory, like little switches in a factory. As he didn't go to university, just left school and needed a job and started in a factory. And then did side work as a DJ, and then applied for, I think, went into expeditions, and then started doing sound on that, and then started doing camera work, and then like now he's like a highly renowned adventure cameraman, making award-winning films, feature docs. So that, you can start anywhere, and it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you can do story, then that's the key element. But I mean, from my point of view, I started in a science realm. I could have become a scientist or whatever. But at the end of the day, once I sort of finished with the career, become like an executive producer, helping others to shape and polish their films. I guess some people go into commissioning. You go from a filmmaker to a commissioner. You go and work at the BBC or National Geographic Channel or Discovery Channel and be the one who's responsible for like a millions and millions of dollar budget per year. And then you have to figure out how to allocate the money and make sure that you're getting enough viewers into your channel and hitting those targets and whatever. So yeah, it kind of, you can end up anywhere, and I know people that have left the industry and started board games, like, and become other kinds of creative stuff. It's just, that's what I love about it. It's kind of one of those fields that has infinite entry points and infinite exit points.
Who would you say this career might not be for, or who is it for? Is there a type of personality that maybe say, you might want to stay home?
You kind of, you got to be able to stay calm under pressure, for sure. It's definitely, if you're someone who likes stability and likes a 9 to 5 and likes to know that they'll be there on the weekends for their kids, forget it. I know people that do it, but it's hard work. A good director friend of mine, like, it was years and years ago when FaceTime was suddenly become a thing, and he had like a 2-year-old, and I remember like, him trying to like spend time with his 2-year-old before getting on set to shoot, and like, because they're going to bed and time zones. So it can be a tough juggle, to be doing that kind of stuff. So, um, in terms of who you should be, again, like it's one of those things where unpredictability is just inherent in the job. You can plan as many contingencies as you want, and there's always going to be something that you don't expect. And it's going to be like, you have to solve this problem on shoot or wherever it might be, because the stakes are super high. There might be millions of dollars at stake for this production, and a channel's put money down, and you've got crews there, and someone hasn't turned up, or something, other shoot ending scenario has just occurred, and it's on your shoulders to make the best of it. You've got to basically find a solution. And that's where I personally thrive. I love that kind of like impossible problem that you get thrown, and you're heroic if you solve it. But people also understand that you could have, like, if you don't do it, or you don't, save the day 100%, they'd be like, well, that was an impossible situation. You did the best you could. So there's an understanding to it as well.
So let's say someone is they're in this world now. They've gotten hired by a company. They're trying to move their way up in the documentary filmmaking world. Maybe they're only doing sound now. Maybe they're doing editing, whatever. But in a big picture, is there anything that you would say to somebody in this world? Definitely do not do this, or definitely do this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of dues, I mean, one of the things I learned, I can't remember whether this was advice from someone else or something that I kind of figured out myself, but I always figured out like, you need to make yourself indispensable to production, you know? And if you're at the bottom and you're working under a director, like, it's, using your observation skills and your, problem solving skills to solve a problem before the director even asks you to solve the problem, or the director even knows there's a problem. That's something that is like one of those things that's really going to make you stand out above anybody else in the production. And I think for a director, you've got so many, and me in this position now, you've got so many balls to juggle. If someone else is taking a lot of that weight off your shoulders, you go like, oh, wow, like that person knows what they're doing and I can trust them. I don't have to worry about that. That's a great, great skill to have. You don't want to be the opposite, to actually be a burden on a shoot. And you're like, oh, I have to worry about doing my own job, but also make sure that that person is doing their, taking care of their stuff. I don't know if we can swear on it, but like, taking care of their shit as well. Like,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so, I think that's the sort of do's and don'ts. But the other one I think is always tough for a lot of people in this industry, particularly in the sort of junior levels, is people are always in a rush to climb the ladder. I think for me, I've seen it happen myself, and I like earning my stripes every single level. And it's important because as a manager in any career, you have to have done the job so that when you progress, you can manage the person below you doing that job because you've already done it before. And so when you're in this industry in television and you try and run before you can walk, there's always a risk you're going to fall in that scenario. And people have fallen, and sometimes they haven't gotten back up. People are so desperate to become a director. One of the hardest jobs is to go from producer to director. You've kind of got from that supporting role to that role of responsibility of like, no, you get sent out on a shoot and you are the most senior person. So, that's a tough one to prove. And people go, that's the job I want, and I'm going to get there as quickly as possible. And when they get there, the weight on their shoulders is too great. And sometimes, as I said, like you get one chance to be a director, and if you fail, you may not get a second. So I think that's a key piece of advice I'd have is don't rush. Make sure you're in the right place at the right time when you're ready.
I love that analogy, the running before you walk. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so, so I would imagine, so a director, I'm going to assume, knows how to do every job on that set. Would that be a true statement? Like, I know sound. Like, you may not know the technical of their buttons on a particular piece of hardware, but you know the way that's supposed to be. You understand how lighting should be. Would you say you got that big picture already under your belt, so you can guide someone if that's hey, that's true.
I think for sure. Like, I mean, this is where I've come from. Is I've always been passionate about the technical side. I love cameras and sound and geekery and all that kind of stuff, and learning all of those things as I come through. So when I do get into that role of being a director on a set, like it's all about communication. Being a director is all about clear communication. And if you know more about that other person's job and what they're doing, you can have a much cleaner and clearer and faster line of communication with that person rather than being like, I don't really know what's wrong with the lighting on this. I think you should maybe make that light go over there. Like, there's kind of that like block, if you could say, actually, see that dado light, actually, if we move it around to this side and put like a filter over it and do this, or, do this with the audio or move the mic around here, you can speak in everyone's language. It's so much faster. I think that's a huge skill to have.
Yeah. So, but I would assume, would you disagree with the statement? You should have done those jobs. You could probably get enough info having not done them, or what do you think?
I mean, it depends. As I said, there's a lot of roles in a film set. You've got cameramen, or camera people, you've got sound people, you've got, all these kind of things. Those roles of camera and sound, I don't think people have necessarily had to have been a professional cameraman to be a director or a soundman, even though sometimes those people do end up in that role. I mean, in the production team role, where you kind of got the runner, the researcher, the producer, the director, the exec producer, that kind of lineage. I know a lot of people that have skipped a couple of roles, and it's fine because they're clear communicators and they know what they want. I just think you become a better all-rounder to have kind of come up through those things so that you can know that, great, this is, it's also a mentoring thing as well. Like if you're trying to mentor runners and researchers in their job, it's sometimes easier to be in that position and talk with them from a position of like, okay, when I was doing this, this is the stuff that I learned and the ways that I did it. But I think to answer your question, to be a director, to have done the production roles, I think it kind of comes with a natural progression of experience. There's very few people that just jump into the industry and become a director. It's kind of like you've got to, promote up the ladder in a sense. And I think, short answer, if you're a very good communicator and you know exactly what you want, then you don't necessarily need to have done those roles. But for most people, I think it's a wise choice to do it.
Okay. I think we beat that subject enough. What about if you could change anything in the about documentary filmmaking, about the industry? Is there anything you'd change?
It's a tough industry for mental health. It's one of those things where, particularly when I was in it, in the UK, and it's one of those industries where, you're not flogging yourself, but sacrifice is kind of rewarded. If you're on a big production, a big series, and you come in on a Monday and people are like, oh yeah, like I was preparing for this shoot and I came into the office on Saturday, Sunday. There's like a pride in that. And it's hard to not like do that yourself. You know, everyone's competing to have worked the hardest and show that they're, again, it comes down to like, you know, trying to show that you're indispensable to the team. Everyone is always trying to prove themselves the entire time. And
Yeah.
that can weigh on you. It can be like, you know, when things are some of these productions can be 2 years and the shooting schedules can be, you know, 18 months in length, and it can be tough and exhausting. So I think people need to recognize that burnout is a big issue. And sometimes you do need to take a break and sharpen the saw and come back at it.
You remind me of the Japanese work culture where they have people that sleep in the office, right? And they work
Yeah.
all these extra hours in order to prove their worth. But it sounds pretty rough.
I've done that before. I know friends have done that before. You've got sofas in the editing suites and you're like, well, you know, we've got a deadline, you know, tomorrow. There's no point in commuting home and coming back at 8 o'clock in the morning. I might as well just sleep here.
Right, right. Okay, let me read you this statement. You tell me true or false. People say that documentary filmmaking is dying because of budget cuts and streaming platforms favoring true crime over other subjects. Would you agree or disagree?
Do I get anything in between? Can I agree to some extent?
Answer it any way you want.
Yes, I do agree with that statement. Fundamentally, documentaries evolve over time. Trends change. People like different stuff. We're now in a current state of the world where a lot of industries are struggling, the economy is struggling. And as with any, it doesn't matter if it's banking or investment or pharmaceuticals or biotech, like when you get into a place where people don't want to take a risk, that sort of constrains creativity and people wanted to try take a leap on something. So what that means basically is that we're in a position now with documentaries, as you said, you've got true crime and you've essentially got retrospective stories. Because what that means is that when you come to a commissioner and you go, here's my story and here's how I'm going to tell it, there's no ambiguity. The story is already, it's a story from history. It's already happened. They know the story is what it is. And you go, great, I can see how it's going to work with, you know, dramatic reconstruction and archive and whatever, and interviews. They go, great. I know with a 90% certainty what this is going to look like. And there's no risk because I know, great, if you can deliver that, our viewer's going to love it. The stuff that I make, whether it's kind of more adventure stuff, like you're more in the moment, you're doing what we call actuality, which is you take a crew onto location with someone, a host, a character, whatever, and you're setting them a challenge or, you know, you're trying to film them perform a task. And you're filming something that's real. You know, you're directing it to an extent, but still the results can be mixed or whatever. And there's unpredictability in that. And, you know, so maybe the commissioner would look at that project and go, I can see maybe 50 or 60% of how this is going to look. And I'm scared by the fact that I don't know what the rest of it's going to look like. And it's a risk that I'm not prepared to take. So that's why I think that that's why the big shift in the genres and the types of documentaries that you're seeing on Netflix and whatever are changing, you know, hopefully not forever.
Yeah. I mean, you made me think of Hollywood when you said not being able to take a chance on things. I mean, it's the originality is just for the most part
Yeah.
gone
Yeah.
for those
It's the
sites.
same
Like,
thing.
why are we doing part 6 of this movie when I think of novels, you know, there's millions of novels sitting on shelves, which is incredible stories that just need a script, you know, and just do it. But there you go. No, we got to make sure we're going to get
We're
that
gonna
100 million back, you know, and
yeah,
our
we're
focus
gonna
group says that, you know, if we run part 6, we've got our 100 mil, you know,
we
it's
get
pretty
money.
gross.
And that's what it is. It's a commercial, it becomes down to money and it's less about the creativity and the art of whatever. And that's why the indie documentary market is kind of still alive, you know, in some respects, because people are still trying to make stuff. And what happens on the flip side of it, Netflix doesn't do just commissions, they do acquisitions. So as an indie filmmaker, you could go, great, I've sourced $100,000 or a chunk of money for an idea that I found, and I believe in it so strongly that I'm going to do this by myself as an independent. And then you go, great, you go off and make your film. And then you hope that you can sell it to Netflix or whatever. And Netflix goes, well, great, I can see this project because you've already made it. There's no risk involved for me because I can see the film. So it's another way of doing it.
Okay, so you made me think of YouTube. So you make documentaries for television, but you have other people that are just, I can make a whole documentary on YouTube by myself. I'm going to go to the Appalachians and I'm going to film all the people and what have you. So I guess the competition there almost be for views. everybody has a finite amount of time that they can enjoy watching anything. Will I watch something on BBC or will I watch this dude on YouTube? Right? Have you ever thought of maybe also just taking your skills and becoming one of those people that just handles it all on their own and runs around on YouTube with a lower budget, but at the same time you pocket everything?
Absolutely. It's crossed my mind, especially recently. Like you kind of mentioned it before, the industry is in a really tough moment right now. A lot of friends, a lot of people, especially since COVID, COVID had a massive investment, huge spike. Everyone was working and then just fell off a cliff. And there was a point in 2021, 2022, I think, where like, it wasn't just documentaries, but the entire sort of like film and documentary and TV landscape, 75% of those freelancers were unemployed. Like they had no jobs. There were just no jobs. And so it's really, really tough. It comes down to three things. One of the things is, as you said before, the streaming, the rise of streaming and that kind of stuff. The second thing is YouTube. And the third thing is viewing habits and the younger demographic just watching TikTok and stuff. So to answer your question on YouTube, like you're absolutely right that some of the people are doing fantastic stuff on YouTube, making really good documentaries, and they're getting funding and either if they get millions of views from YouTube, then they're getting good money from it or external funding. And that has completely shifted, you know, the audience. I think someone told me a great statistic. It was like the amount of people that watch YouTube daily compared to other channels was massive. It's a huge market for a lot of people watching YouTube. And that has basically reduced the advertising pot or the subscriber money pot from Netflix and HBO, or for traditional television, whether it's National Geographic Channel or BBC, like those audiences are no longer going to those places anymore for those documentaries. So if they've got smaller audiences, their pots of money are smaller. And so then less work for all people like me. So yes, the competition is now bigger than it ever has been. And yes, there's a lot of noise on YouTube. There's a lot of stuff that's not so great, and it's not fact checked, and it's not like, you get a lot of problems with, people just making stuff up, and it's AI generated. Like there's a lot of junk out there too. So you got to be careful. But fundamentally, we're in a world now where, the landscape of mainstream television is changed, and I don't think it's coming back personally.
Yeah. I mean, I think of my kids, they're 25 and 26, right? And I don't think they don't watch I mean, they just don't watch regular television.
Yeah.
It's
Yep.
YouTube
Yep.
for the most part, maybe TikTok also, but yeah, I mean, they'll watch something on, a Netflix type thing. So they still get eyeballs over there from them, but
Do you
oh,
want to know
what's
something?
coming on at 7 o'clock at night
Yeah.
on Fox? That's not a thing.
What
You
we did when we were younger, like, oh, there's a great documentary at 9 o'clock tonight, or a great film on at 9 o'clock tonight. I'm going to watch it. Like that doesn't happen anymore. But there's something I wanted just on you saying, like people watching, TikTok while they're watching stuff in the background. There's a horrific term. I say horrific. It was a mind blowing term that I heard recently in the sort of like commissioning landscape called second screen potential. And what this means is basically channels like Netflix are making shows with second screen potential. And that means that basically it's a show that you watch in the background while you're scrolling your phone. So it's a show that doesn't really need much engagement, but it's like pretty lights and pretty colors. And now commissioners at Netflix are making shows with second screen potential. And that kind of, I think, is indicative of where we are today. It's really sad.